The Orioles have added their offseason bats, and now, as the winter meetings begin, they turn their attention to the pitching side. Who could the Orioles be in on as the GMs and everybody in baseball gets together in Dallas this week? We'll talk about that coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, December 9th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to run through some Orioles news and notes. We'll talk a bit about the new AAA manager for the Orioles with the Norfolk Tides that was hired last week. We'll talk a bit about some reporting from Ken Rosenthal about the Orioles' interest or non-interest in certain starting pitchers on the market. And then we'll talk briefly about some of the most recent news and Orioles connections from the winter meetings in Dallas. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So we're going to talk Orioles rumors. We're going to talk winter meeting stuff. We're going to talk all that good stuff, Juan Soto, all of it. But to start the pod, wanted to begin with an interesting coaching name who has joined the Orioles staff, as reportedly Tim Federowicz has been hired as the new Norfolk Tides manager. Now, Buck Britton had held that position for the past 3 years in AAA Norfolk. It had been one of the more successful minor league teams in the league, really winning that AAA championship back in 2023. And it seemed like Britton was on the verge of a promotion, and many thought he might be up for the Orioles' open bench coach role. Instead, that went to Robinson Chirinos. But Britton was still promoted to the big league staff, hired as a major league coach this offseason. So he will be doing a multitude of different things for the Orioles in that big league dugout starting next year. Now, you would have thought that maybe the leading candidate to then get the AAA managerial job that was open could have been Roberto Mercado. He's been in the system for a few years now. He had been the AA Bowie manager for the past couple of seasons, and you thought the Orioles really like him. Maybe they send him up. Mercado seems to be, though, really, really good with working with some of the younger players in the system, so maybe they're just not ready to move him all the way up to the AAA level where you start getting some big league vets and, 4A guys and other players like that into the fold. He's done a great job in Bowie, and he will remain in that role. And instead, Tim Federowicz is reportedly hired as the Orioles AAA manager. Now, who is Tim Federowicz? Well, he was a AAA manager last year in the Tigers system, manager of the AAA Toledo Mud Hens, but the Tigers decided not to bring him back after this season. Now, he has played a big role in developing that young Tigers team over the past few years, that team that went on its September run, somehow made the playoffs, somehow knocked out the Astros in the wild card game and got to Game 5 of the ALDS against the Guardians this year. What a finish it was for Detroit, and Federowicz was part of that. He was the major league catching coach for the Tigers in 2023, so he was actually on that big league staff last year, and then apparently they liked so much what he did with kind of younger player development that he put him back in a big-time minor league role, which is AAA manager. Now, before that, he had also been a AAA manager in the Mariners system. He was the manager for the Tacoma Rainiers, the Mariners AAA affiliate, back in 2022, and that was his first coaching job. He finished playing professional baseball in 2021, and the Mariners immediately hired him as their AAA manager. I'm not talking, FCL single A manager. We're talking AAA manager right off the field in 2022. That is how kind of highly sought after he has been as soon as his playing career ended. Now, unsurprisingly, Federowicz, if you remember him, he is certainly in the category of remembering some guys in Major League Baseball. He was a catcher, and there is a vast pipeline of catchers to big league managers. Look at the Orioles bench right now. Brandon Hyde was a catcher. Robinson Chirinos, their bench coach, was a catcher. Federowicz was in the big leagues from 2011 through 2019. Now, he was never really anybody's starting catcher. He was always either a number 2 or number 3 catcher for an organization. He played for 6 different teams, but the 2 big ones being he played for the Cubs briefly in 2016, got a ring out of that. That was also one of the years that Brandon Hyde was the Cubs' first base coach. So he had worked with Brandon Hyde. So Hyde knew him from there. And then also, he played for the Astros briefly in 2018. That was the final year that Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal were still in Houston before they were hired to run the Orioles that offseason. So he's got the Hyde Cubs connection. He's got the Elias Astros connection. That is obviously something that those two guys knew. And that certainly helped him, you would think, get this job. But, he bounced around in the big leagues. As I mentioned, 6 different teams, was mostly a number 3 catcher. Some years got up to a number 2 catcher role, but was never a starter. He was kind of the true journeyman catcher in Major League Baseball, but he also knows AAA well, and that's why he's so fit for this role. He played 532 AAA games over 10 different seasons where he appeared in the AAA level. And really, Federowicz is a guy who has done everything in baseball. He had been a top prospect back in the day. He was then a failed prospect coming up the minor league ladder. He was a backup catcher. He was on the AAA shuttle. He'd been one time traded twice in one day. Not many players can say that. He's been DFA'd. He had signed minor league deals and tried to fight for a spot in camp. Like, he's really done it all in the baseball world, except for like be a good everyday player at the big league level. But in AAA, you're trying to get guys ready for that, but they're not necessarily at that level yet. He's done everything else. And so for Federowicz, it seemed like he was kind of ready to push that into a coaching role, and he's done it. At the big league level, at the AAA level, and it's 3 years in coaching. Clearly, the Orioles were impressed by him, bringing him in for an interview, and it is Tim Federowicz who gets that open AAA managerial job for the Norfolk Tides, taking over for Buck Britton. And I think he really becomes one of the next names that you start eyeing if there are Orioles big league coaching opportunities that continue to come open over the next couple of years. Now, all of a sudden, I think, especially if he does a good job in Norfolk in 2025, that Tim Federowicz gets pretty immediately added to that list for the Orioles. But that was one of the kind of pieces of news that didn't have to do with big league signings and trades and all that good stuff. Now let's get to the juicy stuff. The Orioles have gotten their hitters, right? They filled the right field hole with Tyler O'Neill, 3-year deal over the weekend. They filled the backup catcher hole, a 1-year deal for Gary Sanchez over the weekend. And there's no saying the Orioles couldn't add another bat at some point, but I think it's fair to say that they could be done adding hitters to this team. But they certainly still need to add pitching this offseason. As the winter meetings began today in Dallas, that is what the Orioles' focus has been. But first, I want to talk a bit about some reporting that's come out about their philosophy this offseason. Ken Rosenthal has written about it multiple times over the past week or two, how the Orioles have a certain feeling about pitchers with the qualifying offer attached to it. And we'll kind of break down that thought from every angle and how it impacts the Orioles in free agency coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. This year, skip the holiday hustle and bustle and save 50% off site-wide during the cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, get a $30 reward card when you shop early and score an extra $30 off with promo code MLB. With 5 generations of experience, Omaha Steaks consistently delivers the world's best steak experience, and their gifting experts have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated gift packages starting at $89.99. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide during the cyber sale at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with promo code MLB and a $30 reward card when you shop early. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code MLB. Minimum purchase may apply. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by the DK Law Group. The DK Law Group is a Maryland-based law firm who is redefining the legal process with their modern approach. The DK Law Group specializes in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. They're tech savvy, they treat clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. The DK Law Group is a women-led firm with Diana Kahn at the helm. Diana has been called an unparalleled legal expert. So contact the DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. And Locked On Orioles listeners can call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline, Empowering Legacies. So let's get to those Orioles rumors from the winter meetings. We haven't had an Orioles signing since they picked up Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sanchez over the weekend, but they are certainly looking at pitching. But it's been interesting to see that now twice in the past couple of weeks. Once it was more kind of offhand mentioned by Ken Rosenthal. Then he wrote about it more specifically in a column last week when covering the Orioles and their search for pitching this offseason, because we know they need starting pitching. Rosenthal's written about how, and he's reported that the Orioles were much more in on starting pitchers who did not have the qualifying offer attached to them, and basically talked about how he is hearing that the Orioles are staying away a bit from players who do have that qualifying offer. Now, the big names pitching-wise this offseason with that qualifying offer attached: Corbin Burnes, Max Fried, Nick Pivetta, Sean Manaea, and Luis Severino. Now, Severino has already signed a 3-year deal with the Athletics, so he is off the board. And for Corbin Burnes, he was given the qualifying offer by the Orioles. So if the O's re-sign Burnes, they don't have to give up a draft pick. So he's not as much part of this conversation either. Really, it's about Max Fried, Nick Pivetta, and Sean Manaea. Now, all three of those guys have found their way onto my starting pitcher wish list episodes that I've done this offseason. I would love for the Orioles to sign any of those three. I think all three of them would really help the Orioles rotation. And Mike Elias did talk to the media at the winter meetings just, a couple of hours ago here on Monday evening. And he did kind of refute that report from Ken Rosenthal. He basically said that the Orioles are looking at all avenues, interested in all the starting pitchers left on the market, and would be interested in bringing them all to Baltimore. He was asked specifically about the guys with the qualifying offer and the pick that is attached to it. He said basically that that's certainly something the Orioles take into account when they make these decisions. Like, nothing against doing that. You absolutely are taking everything into account, but did kind of push back on the fact that the Orioles are scared off by the qualifying offer. Now, you can look at this at two sides. One is coming from the team. One is coming from a very respected reporter. It's also not great if Mike Elias did come straight out and say, hey, like, we're scared off by the qualifying offer. Like, that's not a good thing for a GM to do, because even though he's not naming specific pitchers, you would immediately know, okay, the Orioles are scared to sign Max Fried, Nick Pivetta, or Sean Manaea. And that's, whether it be a union thing, whether it be just a good business thing, that is not something he's going to do if Elias and the Orioles do feel that way. So even though he pushed back on it, there's got to be at least some truth, I would think, especially if Ken Rosenthal himself is writing about it. So even if there is just a speck of truth attached to this, I did want to talk about it because it kind of got me going a little bit. Like, this doesn't make a lot of sense from the Orioles' perspective. And the hope is that they've changed their mind and they are truly pursuing all pitching avenues. I totally hope that. But you also have to think there's a chance that it is the case that the O's are scared away by the qualifying offer. Now, if you're asking, Connor, why would they be scared away by pitchers who have the qualifying offer attached? Well, if a qualifying offer has been extended to a player, and again, there's basically three pitchers in the market that it affects now. It's Max Fried, Nick Pivetta, and Sean Manaea. They all were offered the qualifying offer. They all turned it down and became free agents. Now, in a way to reward some lower market teams who are losing their big money free agents and can't pay for them, whatever it may be, there's some draft pick shuffling that happens here if you lose a player that you give the qualifying offer to, or you sign a player that has one attached. Basically, if the Orioles sign any of those three players, Max Fried, Nick Pivetta, Sean Manaea, who have the qualifying offer attached to them, they would lose their third highest draft pick. Now, it's not exact which pick it'll be. That'll all depend on how many picks the Orioles end up with when we get to draft time, but they would lose their third highest draft pick. And right now, that would probably be the Orioles' second round pick. But because they're going to gain some draft picks this offseason too, it would probably be a pick around, the 40s potentially in the draft. And that is a very valuable draft pick, not just for getting an extra player, but also widely increasing your bonus pool that you have to work with in the draft. So that is certainly important. And obviously Mike Elias and the Orioles are great in the draft. They've done an amazing job since taking over. They've gotten a lot of talent out of the draft, and they've made the most of many of their picks so far, and that's not counting when you get more pool money, you can do even more. But here's how it breaks down. Let's look at it pitching wise first, because I know Anthony Santander factors in here, and we'll get to that in a moment. But let's just look at it from the pitching perspective. The Orioles offered a qualifying offer to Corbin Burnes. They are reportedly still in the running to bring him back, and I absolutely think the Orioles should make a strong effort to get Corbin Burnes back on this baseball team. But if he signs elsewhere, the Orioles will get a compensation draft pick. It'll be somewhere in the 30s right after the first round. That is a nice pick to get. And in theory, if the Orioles do end up bringing back Burns, they don't have to give up a pick because he's their own qualifying offer player. But after that, they probably aren't pursuing guys like Max Fried or Sean Manaea anyway. They've probably given a lot of their pitching money to Corbin Burns, which I'm okay with if they do that. So they're probably not even thinking about at that point the other qualifying offer guys. Maybe they sign Burns, get a more, number 4 or 5 starter along with that, and call it an offseason. And it's also vice versa. If the Orioles make the big play for Max Fried, or they really think the arm slot change from Sean Manaea with the Mets last year has kind of turned him back into the ace we once thought he was in Oakland, and they give him some big money. Well, if they're giving out big dollars to Max Fried or Sean Manaea, they're probably not also going to be able to sign Corbin Burns. So in that sense, if you look at it vice versa, they will lose a pick by signing, say, Max Fried, but you would just gain a higher draft pick because you're losing Corbin Burns and he is signing elsewhere. So at worst, it's a wash, and technically your draft position gets a little bit higher because that Burns pick you would get back would be a little higher than the one you would lose, your third highest draft pick, because you signed a player with the qualifying offer. And you do lose a pick for every player you sign that has the qualifying offer attached, but I don't expect the Orioles. I mean, this is where it should be a consideration. Like, I wouldn't sign 2 pitchers who have the offer. Like, if the O's go and get Max Fried, I wouldn't also try and sign Nick Pivetta. I'd go hard after Nathan Eovaldi instead, who doesn't have the qualifying offer attached to him. Like, it's not as smart a business to sign 2 of those players. That's a lot of draft capital to give up. But one of them really, again, doesn't make as big of a difference. And remember, the Orioles signed Tyler O'Neill to a 3-year deal over the weekend. Most likely, that means the Orioles are not bringing back Anthony Santander. And along with Burns, the Orioles also extended the qualifying offer to Anthony Santander. So he is now expected to sign with another team. And when that happens, the O's will get another draft pick compensation, again, around the 30s of the draft, for Santander signing elsewhere. So if you're adding this all up, the only way the Orioles would end up with 1 fewer draft pick than they started with coming into the offseason is a situation where they re-sign Corbin Burns. They also re-sign Anthony Santander while already having Tyler O'Neill. And they bring in a qualifying offer pitcher. Let's say they also sign Sean Manaea. So they get Burns, Santander, and Sean Manaea to go along with Gary Sanchez and Tyler O'Neill. Only in that case would they then be down 1 draft pick, because if they're bringing back Burns and Santander, you don't get the draft pick compensation, and then you'd lose 1 for signing Manaea. And in that case, I'm not really worried about a draft pick because that is a damn good offseason if you're getting Burns, Santander, and Manaea to go along with Gary Sanchez and Tyler O'Neill. But that situation, again, is probably not going to happen because at this point, Santander is more than likely not coming back to Baltimore. So in reality, the worst thing that happens if you sign a qualifying offer pitcher is a situation where you sign Sean Manaea and Corbin Burns, and then you lose Santander to another team. The Santander pick you get back cancels out the pick you give up to get Sean Manaea, and you're back to 0. There's basically no scenario where you are full offseason ending up with 1 fewer draft pick than you started with. Yeah, you might lose a pick, but you'll gain it right back for Burns or Santander. And the reality of the situation is they're probably going to lose both those guys. So more than likely, you're going to get 2 draft picks there. So you have the flexibility. If you're getting 2 extra picks in the 30s, you have the flexibility to go get Max Fried and lose one of those picks. You still end up +1. And I get the Orioles are probably a little upset that Colton Cowser didn't win Rookie of the Year. He probably should have. And if he did, the Orioles would have gotten another compensation draft pick. So maybe that's scaring them away because they were like, oh, we were planning on having another draft pick and now we don't. But it's not like Cowser coming in second took a pick away. It just stopped them from getting an extra one. They still have a full assortment pretty much of picks here that they can use. And I know Mike Elias loves the draft and loves his draft picks, but he did trade one away to the Brewers last year, along with Joey Ortiz and DL Hall, to get Corbin Burns. He's been known to part with them before. He did have an extra one because Gunnar Henderson won Rookie of the Year, so they got one back, so it was kind of a wash anyway. But he's been willing to deal the ones you can, and he should be at this point. Like, it's not just that the math is like the worst is it'll be a wash, and more than likely you'll still be +1 draft pick, even if you sign a guy like Max Fried, Nick Pivetta, and Sean Manaea, who will all help this team. It's also that if you are that concerned about losing a draft pick, that it pulls you away from a potentially impactful starting pitcher who could really help your team. When you now have this influx of cash with David Rubenstein, and you can play in those Max Fried and Sean Manaea markets, and you now have the money to actually sign those guys and bring them into your rotation, why would then a draft pick, losing one draft pick, be the thing that completely throws you off those players? It should certainly be in consideration. It is for every team. The Orioles are doing their due diligence if it is a part of the consideration. But the reporting from Rosenthal made it seem like it was completely stopping the O's from, making serious bids for those pitchers. And that is just, to me, malpractice, especially when you have this influx of cash. I know we haven't seen Rubenstein yet give out a mega deal to anyone, but he helped the Orioles give out their first multi-year deal under Elias when they signed Tyler O'Neill over the weekend. And you just look at it and you think, I just feel like caring that much about losing one draft pick is way too forward thinking for this state of the Orioles. Like, you should still be looking towards the future. You should try to be building a winner now, and also at the same time, building a sustainable future. That is the best thing to do. I certainly think you should be doing that. But is one draft pick now, if the Orioles say, hey, we really like Max Fried, but we're just not going to do it because we are going to lose a draft pick, that is bad process to me. If you like Max Fried, if you like Sean Manaea, if you like Nick Pivetta, losing one pick, and I know it's a fairly high pick, but losing one pick shouldn't be the thing that makes or breaks that potential decision. Because for the Orioles, hey, they're still great at the draft. And that's the other thing. If you lose a pick, I am confident in Mike Elias that he will make up for it by making some outstanding selections in this year's draft, players they will develop to become really good big leaguers. He's got a track record of it, him and his staff, since taking over. I'm confident he will continue to do it. It's almost like I have more confidence in this process in Mike Elias than he does in himself, if he really is that worried about losing a draft pick. And I just think, like, you have to be enough in the win now mindset, because these windows, they close faster than you think. The Orioles are in a World Series winning window right now, but they close faster than you think. Even when you have a team this young, they close faster than you think. And you better go and get yourself a World Series. And the O's at this point have yet to win a postseason game. So the team needs to be improved. A draft pick for a player that might not help you till, at best, 2028 should not be the thing that holds you back from making the 2025 Orioles better. But I know some people disagree. If you do, let me know in the comments. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. I'd like to see what you all think about the Orioles potentially being timid about those pitchers that have the qualifying offer attached. But let's talk about some more winter meetings, MLB rumors stuff. There's been some news coming out about the O's, about other teams, about Juan Soto. My, oh my, that contract that he got. Let's talk a little bit about that to finish off the pod coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So we wrap things up here today with many more news and notes from around the league. Let's start with Clay Holmes, who kind of signed an interesting deal over the weekend with the New York Mets. He was certainly not the Mets' biggest signing of the weekend. We'll get to that in a moment. But he signed a 3-year, $38 million deal with the Mets. And Holmes is someone I had talked about on my relief pitcher wish list last week that I wanted the Orioles to look at. He was a great closer with the Yankees for a while, struggled at times this year, but still showed he can be an elite setup man. But there were rumors swirling that teams were interested in Clay Holmes as a starting pitcher. And it turns out That is what the Mets have signed him to do. They signed him to a 3-year, $38 million deal to be a starting pitcher. And a lot of the reporting surrounding it says that the Orioles were also a finalist for Clay Holmes, and they were also interested in signing him as a starting pitcher. That is really intriguing to me. He's a guy with that sinker-sweeper combination, probably would have needed to add a changeup to be a truly good starter, and I think the Mets will probably do that with Clay Holmes. But it's interesting that the Orioles had not just interest in Holmes, that's expected, but interest in him as a starter. It's kind of a different way, roundabout way, to add to your rotation. And we saw teams have success doing that this year. Reynaldo Lopez had been a reliever. He was signed by the Braves as a starter. He was great this year. Seth Lugo had been a reliever in the past. Last couple of years, he signed as a starter. He's been great. He was amazing for the Royals. And there were other examples of these guys being brought in, transitioning from reliever to starter, and it working out. Now, it doesn't work out for everybody, but even if it doesn't work out for Holmes, he can just revert to being a great setup man and can help the Mets that way because they need bullpen help as well. So I thought it would have been a really interesting signing for the Orioles. But in Ken Rosenthal's reporting, when he wrote about kind of the qualifying offer stuff with the Orioles, he also talked about how the O's are still going after Nathan Eovaldi. I still think he's one of the best starting pitching options for the Orioles to go get that is out there on the market. If you can offer him a 2-year, $45 million deal, you pay him large AAV for shorter years, I think he would potentially take it now into his mid to late 30s, and I think he could really help out the Orioles. Rosenthal also said as much that they are still in the running for Corbin Burnes, and he also said the Orioles are still potentially open to a reunion with Jack Flaherty. Flaherty and Eovaldi, both guys who do not have a qualifying offer attached, so you wouldn't have to give up a draft pick. And we know the era for Jack Flaherty after the trade deadline in 2023 in Baltimore did not go well, and I've kind of brushed it off and just said, even if they've mended their differences, I'm not super interested in the Orioles bringing back Flaherty, but if he ends up being the best deal they can get, he was still, with the Tigers and really at times with the Dodgers, a really, really good starting pitcher this year. So if the Orioles get that version of Jack Flaherty, he will help them win baseball games. So at the end of the day, if they figured out whatever went on in that clubhouse between him and Chris Holt, whatever it may be, also Chris Holt not even with the organization anymore, so maybe that helps a little bit with the old pitching staff versus the new pitching coaching staff that's in there with Drew French at the helm. Maybe it can be a new beginning with Jack Flaherty and the Orioles. And hey, you know what? If they really feel like he's going to help them this time and he's a different guy, I guess I'm open to it. But at this point, I'm wouldn't be super psyched if Jack Flaherty becomes the number one ad for the Orioles this offseason. I think many would agree with that as well. A couple other pieces of news and notes. Mike Baumann got released by the Marlins. I mean, what a trip it has been for him. He's now a free agent again. We'll see if anybody picks him up. I would not be surprised at all if he signs a minor league deal with the Orioles with an invite to spring training to try and win his bullpen spot back. The Orioles love that guy. He was, talking to people, there were maybe no more than 5 other guys in that clubhouse over the last 4 seasons that were more beloved by his teammates than Mike Baumann. Those guys love Mike Baumann in that clubhouse. And it was some ups and downs. And when he was DFA'd, it was time to go. He was struggling so much early this year. But if he can't find a major league deal, I would love the O's to bring him back on a minor league deal, see if they can once again take their crack at kind of harnessing all that stuff that Baumann has in that right arm. Now, obviously, the biggest news of the weekend was, number one, Roki Sasaki was posted. Anyone can sign him. The Orioles have the money to sign him. This young 23-year-old true ace out of Japan. He's capped as an international amateur free agent, so his signing bonus can only be as much money as the team has left in its international bonus pool. The reporting is the Orioles have 5 or 6 of the about 13 million left in their pool. That's one of the higher numbers in baseball. So the Orioles should be suitors here. I think the assumption from everyone is that he is going to sign with the Dodgers. We'll see if that happens, but the Orioles should be absolutely in on Roki Sasaki. And then obviously Juan Soto. 15 years, $765 million to sign with the Mets. Wow. We kind of knew the Orioles weren't in the running anyway, but wow. The bidding war that ended up being between the Mets and the Yankees and the Red Sox and Dodgers were in there a little bit as well. Just wow. And you really, first of all, it is great that he signed with the Mets and not the Yankees. To not have to see Juan Soto 13 times a year. The Yankees are a much worse team now than they were a couple of days ago when you thought they might get Juan Soto back. Just Judge and other guys, you can beat that team. Judge and Soto, that team is hard to beat. And as you can see, they won the division and went to the World Series this year. But without Juan Soto, Yeah, it means the Yankees might be bigger players for Corbin Burns or Anthony Santander and guys like that. And it would really hurt to see one of those guys, especially Santander, in pinstripes. But it's a good first step that he is signing with the Mets and not with the Yankees in the same division. It's just tough to see. You just hate to see it. You really hate to see a Yankees team that just can't pull the money together to sign its own players. I mean, it's really sad and tough to watch, honestly, to see the mighty New York Yankees are getting beaten out by the Mets in their same city to sign their own players. I mean, it's just a real tough scene that's happening up there in the Bronx. But hey, we are in the winter meetings, which means things are happening rapidly. I mean, I'm worried as I'm recording this here about 8:30-ish p.m. Eastern time Monday night. I'm like, are the Orioles going to break some news? Apparently, when Elias was talking with the media on Monday evening, they were asking him about David Rubenstein, and then he got a phone call in the middle of the session. Someone asked if it was Rubenstein. He said no, but he said it's the next best thing, then smiled. And then as soon as his media session was over, he got right back on the phone and called that person back. So the O's should be looking at pitching, maybe more deals you would think coming at this week's winter meetings. In terms of people that are still out there, there's been some names that are on my wish list that have already been signed. Luis Severino signed with the A's, Blake Snell with the Dodgers, Yusei Kikuchi with the Angels, Matthew Boyd with the Cubs. In terms of relief pitchers, Blake Trinan back to the Dodgers, Jordan Romano signed on Monday with the Phillies. So some arms are off the board, but some more arms are still out there, and hopefully the Orioles are active in adding to that rotation this week in Dallas. And when they are, I will have it all covered here on the pod. But either way, we will be back on Tuesday evening recapping everything you need to know from Tuesday at the winter meetings. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.